Europe is uneasy tonight, and for the first time in years, they are openly showing it. Because after months of silence, Niger has finally released its uranium back onto the international market, without France, without ECOWAS control, and without Western brokers deciding the price.
Well, Niger says that it is putting uranium produced at a mine run by a subsidiary of a huge French fuel company on the international market. The country's military leaders removed Orano's operational control of 3 of its main mines last year. About a quarter of the uranium supplied to Europe's nuclear power plants come from Niger, and the site in question could produce around 1,300 tons of uranium concentrate, which is worth around 250 million euros. Take a look.
Uranium, a highly sought-after element mined from deep in the Earth's crust, is at the centre of a rift between Niger's military regime and the French nuclear firm Orano. On Sunday, Niger's state television announced that the country's reserves, produced by SEMER, will be put on the international market, citing the ruling junta's chief.
Niger claims its legitimate right to dispose of its natural riches to sell them to whoever wants to buy them under the rules of the market in complete independence.
SEMER was a subsidiary of Orano, which is 90% owned by the French government, until the junta nationalised it in June. It has been in the military regime's line of sight since it came to power in a coup in 2023. In December 2024, Orano admitted it had lost control of its 3 uranium mines in the country and has since filed several international arbitration proceedings against Niger. Russia, too, has entered the fray. In July, Moscow's energy minister said it was also interested in mining Niger's uranium. Orano still retains a 60% stake in subsidiaries and announced in September that a tribunal had ruled in its favour and had ordered Niger not to sell uranium produced by SEMER. The ongoing tensions are part of the deterioration in relations between Niger's leadership and the former French colonial power.
Welcome to Afriscope TV. Before we dive in, please like, share, and subscribe so we can keep giving you real African stories the global media often hides. Now, let's get into today's report. Niger's uranium, long controlled, long discounted, and long exported under agreements that many analysts called colonial contracts, has officially hit the global market again. But this time, the buyers are different. The power dynamics are different, and the world is paying attention because the AES nations, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, are no longer operating under civilian governments friendly to Europe. They are now run by military governments that insist on sovereignty first, foreign influence last. The question shaking European policy circles is simple. What happens when Africa finally sells its own resources on its own terms? Inside Brussels, officials are reportedly alarmed at the shift. For decades, European energy security was quietly tied to uranium shipments from Niger. Now, with Niger negotiating directly with new partners, Russia, China, and emerging energy blocs, Europe risks losing one of its most dependable sources of nuclear fuel.
Well, for more on this story, we're joined by our international affairs editor, Angela Diffley. Angela, France and the European Union, they're not delighted by this news, are they?
They're not delighted, no. As the president of Niger says, the general who is leading the junta there, this is our uranium. We will sell it to whom we want, as we wish, when we want. And that is the reality. It's true that this idea that some of it has already been seen. There are reports in international media that some uranium has already been taken to Togo, that it will from there go to Russia. These are reports in international media. In some ways, the Americans, the International Atomic Agency, would prefer Russia than Iran, which is one of the other possibilities. If it's going on the international market, France has no way, Europe has no way, nobody else has any way of stopping Niger selling that uranium to whomsoever it wants. What is also worrying is that in order to get from Niger to Togo in West Africa or to the coast there, it has to cross several areas which are controlled by jihadists. And that in itself is a real security worry for the European Union, for France, that somehow jihadists might get their hands on that uranium as it travels. But the reality is that that is the position we're in. They have chosen to sell it to Russia. Increasingly, as we know, Russia has an important influence in Africa. It is helping many of these former French colonies in their fight against jihadists. Experts don't see their efforts being any more or less successful than the French efforts, but that is what's happening. In France, about 20% of France's own uranium needed for civil nuclear reactors came from Niger. So both France and the European Union are trying to find other avenues of supply because it's an important resource which now has become very complicated to access.
And this is yet more evidence of how French influence, soft power and commercial interests have plummeted in Africa recently, isn't it?
Yeah, it's such a long way from when this happens every time there is a new French president. There is an attempt to reset relations with Africa in various different ways, ranging from not long after independence to we will work together, we're equals, to further along French presidents saying, we understand you think we're too paternalistic, we need to be more equal, to Emmanuel Macron at the beginning of his presidency saying, we must make this relationship much more about commercial interests. We're all equals again. And it is such a long way from those speeches he gave at the beginning of his presidency. France is disliked in much of West Africa and Central Africa, where it was the former colonial power. Much of this, it is true, there has been some of it that has been deliberately stirred by Russian propaganda, but there does appear to be a dislike of France in that area for whatever reason. It is very useful for various West African and Central African governments where France was the former colonial power to use France as a scapegoat. That is a classic situation. But for a number of reasons, it is easy to do something that will anger France in all of these countries. We're talking about Burkina Faso, of course, Mali, Niger, all of whom have thrown out the French in recent years. And it's quite unusual amongst colonial powers that France, for very many years, kept military bases in its former colonies, of course, with the acquiescence of those former colonies. By the end of this year, the only one that will remain will be in Djibouti, right over near the Horn of Africa. All of those bases, which were useful to France and useful at different times, different Western Central African leaders asked for them to come in and push back jihadists. That is now over. For now. It's a very complicated relationship. It's very difficult always for any colonial power, France, to separate defending its own commercial interests, because there were very significant French commercial interests in all of these countries after France left. And any opportunity to defend their own French commercial interests, big banks, big oil companies, is going to be attractive to the French government. But they were invited into Niger, to Mali, to push back jihadists, and French soldiers lost their lives in that, several years long operation, particularly to try to push back jihadists. And a lot of French people think, well, French soldiers lost their lives. If you don't want us, that's fine. That's the reality. It's a moving relationship, and there is a bad relationship at the moment between France and many of its former colonies in Africa.
All right.
And this is where the emotional weight sits. Did Europe ever expect Niger to survive this long after sanctions? Or did they completely underestimate the new unity of the AES alliance? And now that Niger has not only survived, but re-entered the global market stronger, what does that say about Africa's changing power? Before we go deeper into the analysis, remember to join the Afriscope TV membership or support us with a super thanks. It helps us stay independent and continue bringing you stories the world needs to hear. Now, the reactions coming from Europe reveal something bigger than resource panic. They reveal a geopolitical fear. A fear that Africa may be stepping into a new era where its resources are not dictated, discounted, or controlled by old powers. a fear that the AES model might spread across the continent, a fear that the balance of global energy could shift if more African nations reclaim their resources. But it also sparks another question many Africans are now asking. If Europe depended so heavily on Niger all these years, why did Niger remain one of the poorest nations in the world? That question alone is reshaping the conversation online, in African capitals, and even inside European parliaments. Afriscope TV continues to follow this developing story as the AES bloc grows more confident and Europe repositions itself in the face of a rising Africa. Disclaimer: this report is based on publicly available information, geopolitical analyses, and ongoing expert commentary. Viewers are encouraged to follow updates as the situation evolves. In moments like this, history reminds us that power does not shift in silence. It shifts when nations decide to rewrite their destiny. And today, Niger has taken one more step toward doing exactly that. Sources and key reporting used: international uranium market updates, European energy security reports, AES alliance policy statements, ongoing geopolitical analyses.